All right. 55. The percent of Americans who smoke can be modeled by the function S of t equals negative 0.59t plus 42.28, where t is, this is very similar to the last one, t is the number of years since 1965. So whatever we get for our answer, we're going to have to add it to 1965. So we want to determine the years. That means find t, which represent Americans whose smoke is less than 10%. That means S of t equals 10. Okay, so now that we've got that everything identified, this is pretty simple. So I want to know when S of t, which is negative 0.59t plus 42.28, I want to know when that is less than 10%. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 42.28 from both sides. I get negative 0.59t is less than negative 32.28. Going to divide by negative 0.59, negative 0.59. Since I'm dividing by a negative, that means I have to flip. So I get t is greater than, whoops, 54.7. Well, since it's greater than 54.7, that means that t is going to be greater than or equal to 55. It has to be more than 54.7, so t has to be greater than or equal to 55. So this is 55 years since 1965. So 1965 plus 55 is equal to the year 2020. Okay, 56. A trailer can be rented for $19.95 per day with an additional charge of 11 cents per mile. Okay, so for part A, I want to write a function c of x that gives the cost for renting the trailer traveling x miles. So the cost of driving x miles is going to be $19.95 per day plus an additional charge of 11 cents per mile plus 0.11, and we've got x as the number of miles. Okay, how far can the car be driven in one day if you must spend less than $90? That means find x when c of x is less than 90. So that means I want to know when is 19.95 plus 0.11x less than 90. Okay, so if I subtract 1995, I get 0.11x is less than 70.05. When I divide by 0.11, I get that x is less than 636.8. So if x is less than 636.8, well, I would just leave it like that. It doesn't say round it, so you would have to drive. So you can travel less than 636.8 miles to stay within budget. There's so many ways to write these. Okay. Now you can think about, well, why don't you just round it up to 637? Well, because there are numbers in between 636.8 and 637. Okay, an airplane is flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet. The plane begins to descend at a rate of 850 feet per minute. Write a linear function that gives the height h of t of the plane t minutes after the plane begins to descend. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. So we're flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet. So this is our initial height. And we are descending at a rate of 850 feet per minute. So that means that our rate of change is negative 850. So our h of t is equal to negative 850t plus 30,000. Or you could have written it, I did it automatically in slope-intercept form. Or you could write it as, it makes equals 30,000 minus 850t. Either way is fine. You're going to get the same thing. Okay, the meaning of the slope in this context is the descent of 850 feet per minute. Okay, so now it wants me to sketch a graph of this. Okay, so let's do a grid here, and I'll do the best I can. All right, I know I've got 2 points on the line, so I can graph this. I know I have a point of 0, 30,000 feet. So let's do 10,000, 20,000, and 30,000. Okay. Okay. So let's see. I just need to find another point on the line. So I can pick any value for t that I want. Okay, so let's say then for my other point, let t equal, I don't know, 20. Well, let's do 10 because I don't really know. So h of t is going to be 30,000 minus 850 times t, or times 10, excuse me, and that gives me 30,000 minus 850 times 10, and that gives me 21.5. Okay, so let's do this go up by 5. So let's do 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and I may want to extend this to 35. So I've got the point 10, 21.5. So at 10, I'm going to do 21.5, so it's going to be right there. And I know this is going to be an approximate. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, I think it's going to be something like this. I don't think my graph is very good. Okay, so anyway, we'll see what we can do here. Okay, so now let's see. Now I want to sketch the graph of g of t equals 2500 on the same grid. So 2500 is going to be like right here. So that's a horizontal line where or where it equals 2500. Okay, then use the graph to determine the times for which the plane will be at an altitude of 2500 feet. That means find the point of intersection. And it says to estimate it from the graph. So I'm going to estimate that it's about 28 minutes. Let's see if there's any more to this. There is not. Okay, now we can find it exactly by setting this function equal to this function. But it doesn't ask you to do that. Okay. All right, so use the graph to solve the inequalities. Express the answers as inequalities in interval notation. The line with the positive slope is f of x. Okay, so this is f of x. And the line with the negative slope is g of x. Okay, now when I'm doing this, the first thing I always do is I figure out, well, where are they the same? Okay. At x equals 2, f of x is equal to g of x, because that's where the lines intersect. So f of x is greater than g of x. This means, if you're looking at the graph, this means where is the line for f of x above g of x? Well, here, from here, f of x is greater than g of x. So that is from 2 to infinity. Where is f of x less than g of x? That's asking you where is the line for f of x below or the same as g of x. Okay. Well, from here over, f of x is below g of x, so that would be from negative infinity to 2, and since it's equal, it has a bracket. Okay, well, let's go back and look at the very first sections, the R1 through R3, and let's look at what we can do with these. Okay. All right, so these are some basic skills that you're going to need throughout, and let's make sure you're refreshed on there. Write as a product of prime factors. Okay, that means I'm going to break it down into just its prime numbers. Now, in class, what I showed you, what I do is I start with the number. And remember, the prime factors are 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, and then they just go on and on. So I start with my number and I look at the smallest prime. It's even, so it's divisible by 2. When I do that, I get 49. 49 is not divisible by 2, not divisible by 3, not divisible by 5, but is divisible by 7, and when I do that, I get 7. When I get a prime number here, I stop. So the prime factorization of this is 2 times 7 times 7. 60 I do exactly the same way. I start with 60. It is divisible by 2. That gives me 30. 30 is still divisible by 2, which gives me 15. 15 is not divisible by 2, but it is divisible by 3, and I get 5. I've got a prime number here, so I stop. So this is 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. Okay, 125 is divisible by 5. It's not divisible by 2 or 3, but it is divisible by 5, which gives me 25. That's also divisible by 5, and I end up with 5. So this is 5 times 5 times 5. Okay, perform each operation. If you're multiplying, you multiply numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator, so that gives you 12 over 24. And then you want to simplify it. Well, I know that 12 and 24 both have a factor of 12. So this is 12 times 1 over 12 times 2. That cancels out, so I just get 1/2. Okay, when I divide, that means that I flip and multiply. So this becomes 5 over 6 times 4 over 25. Then I follow the steps here. I multiply. 5 times 4 is 20. 6 times 25 is 150. Okay, so let's see. I know each of these is divisible by 10. So this can be 10 times 2 divided by 10 times 15. So that just becomes 2 over 15. It's only when I'm adding that I need to find a common denominator. Adding or subtracting. When you're multiplying, don't worry about it. But if you're adding, you have to be adding the same things. Okay, so my least common denominator is 6. So what that means is I have to take 7 over 2 and multiply it by something, and 2 over 3 and multiply it by something. Well, to turn 2 into 6, I have to multiply this times 3, which means I have to multiply the numerator as the same. This is just the same as multiplying by 1, so I'm not changing the value, just the way it looks. And 3 times 2 will give me 6. Here, to turn 3 into 6, I multiply by 2, so I have to do the numerator as well. So this gives me 21 over 6 plus 4 over 6, which becomes 21 plus 4 over 6, which is finally 25 over 6. Okay, absolute value. Absolute value is a distance measure. It is the distance from 0. Direction doesn't matter. So 7 is 7 units away, so the absolute value of 7 is 7. -6 is 6 units away from 0, so the absolute value is just 6. Distance is always a positive measure. You don't say that you drive 5 miles to work and then 5 miles back, -5 miles to get home. Okay, so see, this is a grouping symbol, so I have to find the absolute value of -2 first. So this becomes the opposite of 2, which is just -2. Okay, I'm going to stop here.